I wanted to welcome everybody and also thank everybody for coming in for an early panel. I know that the 9 o'clock start is one of the harder ones to come in and be here and be properly caffeinated and hydrated and all of that. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. I'm Jessica Seddon, and I am co-founder of the Institutional Architecture Lab. I'm also a director of the Dietz Initiative on Environment and Global Affairs at Yale in the Policy School. And in some ways, and I want to also just explain a little bit about the context for this meeting, and then ask my fellow speakers to come up. And we'll leave time in the end for questions, participation, and most of all, advice from people in this room. Because what this is meant to be is a conversation with all of you now and over the course of the week and with others who are at COP about how to implement a set of regional tipping element monitoring and response facilities. So tipping elements are often talked about, or tipping points are often talked about in a global sense. And that's important because they are many of the risks of massive environmental changes, the kinds of changes like the Amazon shifting into a savanna, or the South Asian monsoon slowing or shifting substantially, or the Atlantic meridian overturning circulation, the ocean's conveyor belt ceasing to convey heat from the tropics to the north. These changes have a common global forcing mechanism. They have a common global cause, that is global warming. They do also have global implications, but importantly, they're also very regional and very different. There's a big difference between the impacts of the loss of coral reefs, say for fishing ecosystems, for the loss of Arctic or Antarctic sea ice. Ocean circulation is very different than the transition of a rainforest into a savanna. Similarly, some of the regional drivers are also different. So with coral reefs, it's partly about climate. It's also partly about ecosystem pressures in fishing. It's also partly about pollution. Similarly for the other tipping points. So in recognition of this variation, Manjana Milkerit, my co-author, and I, along with other members of the Global Tipping Point community and a wider community of institutional design, developed the concept of tipping element monitoring and response facilities. So this is explained further. You have the cards that aren't quite big enough to be great fans. If I had known, I would have made them a little bit larger. But the QR codes have a link to the paper about the concept. But the most important thing about the concept is that this year, 2026, we also have some space to implement, to build a set of regional knowledge action mechanisms, regional knowledge action organizations that are able to integrate some of the science around tipping elements and connect them into political and planning processes for responding to them. And I should emphasize, one of the things that the tipping element monitoring facilities are not, it's not meant to be a new organization of everything. What it is a weaving together of existing science and regional coordinations. It's a sharpening of accountability for three key functions. One is to represent knowledge about tipping elements. So knowledge from Western science, knowledge from indigenous knowledge, knowledge in the form of lived experience, and to be able to develop ways of communicating, sharing, and integrating the complexity of these changes that are both ecological and climate related. The second key function is to build the structures for recognizing, for giving this knowledge a seat at the table. Not enough to produce a report, a video, a visualization, but where at the table, along with employment, development, infrastructure, livelihoods, where does this sit? What are the recognition mechanisms? And third is to develop the ability to coordinate a response across sectors, across scales, across cities, national governments, across regions. So represent, recognize, and respond are the three key functions that we're seeking to build through these facilities. But in building anything new, you always want to ask the all-stars who have gone before in creating integrated regional science bodies, in bridging science and politics, in developing multi-level responses, and ask them, what could we do that's new and of value for them? And also, what lessons to learn? And I'm very happy to be joined by three speakers today who have exactly those perspectives to kick off the conversation. And I'd love to hear from you or others you know who might be interested in giving us advice in the very beginning of a design and initiation of experiments process that will happen over this year. So the first speaker we have is Marielos Peña-Claros, who is the co-chair of the Science Panel for the Amazon. We also have Arunabha Ghosh, who's making his way over. He is the South Asia Special Envoy for COP30, as well as the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And we have Rolf Rodvin, who is the Executive Director of the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. So I'd like to invite Marielos to come up and share some of her perceptions on what might be helpful for an Amazon tipping element and monitoring facility, but also lessons that we should not have to relearn. So thank you very much, Marielos.
Thank you, Jessica, for the invitation, and good morning to all of you. It's really nice to be here. So the Science Panel for the Amazon was convened in 2019 by the United Nations Solution Development, I should say this correctly, Sustainable Development Solution Network. And it was the result actually of the urgency in that many researchers were seeing in terms of all the changes that were occurring in the Amazon in terms of climate change, land use change. And so the Science Panel for the Amazon started working. It brought together around 220 researchers working in the Amazon, and we did really make an effort to include researchers from the Amazonian countries, but also researchers, international researchers working in the Amazon. And I think that's something that, a lesson learned that I will say in there is that try to bring together a large diversity of actors. So we brought researchers, but we also invited scientists from indigenous people. We invited as well scientists coming from local communities, so that they will have also a voice in the work that we were doing. And we launched our first report in 2021. This was already an interdisciplinary report. It's a huge document, about 1,000 pages, and I think what is important in there is that it was an interdisciplinary effort. So we had climatologists, ecologists, sociologists, anthropologists. We had, again, representatives of indigenous people, local communities, and we were talking and dialoguing during COVID. So all of this was done online. So it was extremely challenging. But I think but this microphone is really, cut. Yeah, maybe here. Okay. But what made this effort important was that we were really is the mission, the compromise that people had in terms of, okay, how can we save the Amazon? And maybe this is an initiative that we will pull it together. And in that report, tipping points and the risk of having a tipping point in different areas in the Amazon was a crucial element. And I think we, as science panels, we basically summarized all the information that was available on that topic from at that time, and we produced recommendations based on that. One of our recommendations was to stop deforestation and degradation. You see the result of that. Hasn't really stopped yet, but we're still hoping. But one of our strong high-level recommendations at that time was also to look at restoration and how to do large-scale restorations in areas that were degraded and deforested. That idea of having arts of restoration rather than arts of deforestation has been was captured by by a development bank here in Brazil, which is investing a large quantity of money on doing restoration. So in terms of what is the impact that you can have, that is one policy impact I think that we had with our report. Since then, we have produced a lot of policy briefs trying to focus on more specific issues that we identified as relevant. So I think maybe also a lesson learned is that some of these policy briefs really landed in very fertile soil and have resulted in have found their way in policies or decision making, and they're moving along. We don't know exactly where they are, but we do have an idea that we did influence those discussions. Some others didn't really really bloom as we wish it will. So I think this connection between, okay, what are the needs, what is what policymakers are looking for, and how can you reply as a group of scientists really very quickly. I think it's a challenge for an initiative like this, and it will be a challenge as a regional initiative as well. How flexible, how quickly can you reply to an urgent call from a government? We have yesterday launched a new report, and this report was a bit of a different report because we wanted to focus on the. You need to tell me when to stop because I can talk for hours. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so in the new report, it was a bit different because we wanted to focus on that report on, okay, we know we have a crisis. We know we have a crisis on biodiversity loss, on climate change. We're approaching a tipping point in several areas of the Amazon. We may not understand, and I think this is something that is coming clearly more recently, how different factors are affecting that and how these factors are actually influencing each other. So we deforest, that has a social, economical, and political drivers influencing the deforestation rate. Also, illegal activities are playing a role on that. But that has an effect also on how much water the forest is being recycled, that is moving, and will have also ultimately an effect on agricultural production. So all those linkages, we are only now, I think, really starting to understand better and to map that better. But at the same time, I also think that it's time to highlight potential solutions. So that's what we were looking at, initiatives that are already being implemented in the Amazon that maybe can be upscaled, that can be replicated in other areas. I know my time is, I think it's up, but I think we have here small bookmarker that my colleague has some copies. If you are interested in the report, more than happy to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marielos. And I think the science panel for the clap for Marielos. But I think the bridge that Marielos just created on the going from science that is able to integrate multiple perspectives, multiple forms of knowledge, and highlight some of these interconnectedness, but also highlight solutions that work and solutions that could be upscaled, creates a very nice bridge to our next speaker, who I'd like to welcome to the dais podium, Arunabha Ghosh, who is the South Asia Special Envoy to COP30 and also the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water. If you have not followed the work of the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water, you should. It's all over LinkedIn. But one of the things that I've been particularly pleased to see is Arunabha's championing of local regional solutions. He just launched the Granary South Asia Climate Solutions yesterday. And I think the thing that I'd love you to reflect on as we build these tipping element monitoring and response facilities is building the connection between the representation of change and the recognition and response. How does the science make its way into political and governance tables in your experience? And what advice might you have for us to learn from what you've done and do it more effectively?
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, and bon dia, everyone. Sorry for arriving late. I think I need to hold this here. Yes, yes. I think if you hold it down, it doesn't work. Something
exactly,
like that. Yes.
Something like.
So I actually regret missing the first two speakers, and I would have responded a little bit more. So pardon my ignorance if there's something that I'm repeating. But to your point, first of all, when we think about tipping points, I think the core gap right now we have is between planetary tipping points and developmental tipping points. We have not established that connection yet. Why do am I not, is this better? Yeah, you tell me if I hold it here, that's better? Okay, yes. So the point I was saying is that the core gap we have right now is between planetary tipping points, our assessment of them, and developmental tipping points. Why do I say this? The planetary tipping points issue is central. It is why we are here. It gives us a fulcrum around which to organize our science thinking. Nevertheless, those of us who come from the global south have also been trained and ingrained into a model of development where traditionally it used to be a linear pathway of development. And that is what we have inherited from the advanced economies of the world. Linear in terms of agriculture to industry to services, linear from rural to urban, linear to from small scale industries to large scale centralized stuff, linear in terms of much more centralized governance. So now on the planetary side, we seem to be, at least some of us, seem to be internalizing that the whole notion of tipping points is there is a disruption in that linearity, that it is not a smooth curve. And yet we have not yet understood what is the non-linear disruption in our development pathways. So there is now a disconnect between one type of non-linearity that is becoming more and more evident and one type of desirable non-linearity that hasn't been entirely explored. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is that the connection between tipping points at a planetary scale and lived reality in terms of environmental stresses at a very hyper-local scale, again, has not been established. A couple of, now 3 days ago, over the weekend, I had the privilege and the good fortune of going upriver and managing to even swim in the Amazon. I never thought I would ever do that, mostly because I'm not a very good swimmer. But it reminded me of the critical role that the Amazon plays in the global hydrological cycle. The Amazon creates 36% of its own rainfall, but it is also exporting rain to other geographies via atmospheric rivers. If we do something bad to the Amazon, many of us across the globe are going to be impacted. But impacted how? When we say the monsoons will get impacted, when we say there will be crop yield failure, etc., what does that actually mean in a hyper-local way? So one of the things that we've been doing at CEEW, at my institution, is developing the first high-resolution climate resilience atlas for India. And what does that mean? It means you take the large pixels that you get in climate and you downscale them to a district, to a sub-district, to a city, down to a neighborhood level. So we've been able to do that, say, heat stress from one neighborhood to the next, flood risk from one neighborhood to the next. We now need to find ways to connect this issue of global tipping points to this lived reality. That's the only way we'll be able to internalize what seems like very far out science that ordinary citizens might not internalize. And my last point, Jessica, is if we did these two things, then we have to ask ourselves, what are the governance mechanisms we need to respond to near-term risks? And what kind of governance will we need? Is this for technology development? Is it technology deployment? Is it for pooling our resources? Is it pooling our scientific capability? Where is liability resting? These are issues that we have not discussed. So that's the third gap between tipping points as science and the paradigm shifts we need in our governance. So let me stop there.
So
I'm
I'm
not sure
hearing-
if I really responded to wanted me.
Just to summarize really quickly, and now that I have the mic angle correctly. So one of the key pieces is on the representation. We need to have a hyper-local clarity on what connects from the science into the lived reality. The second piece, though, that I'm hearing is that the recognition part of these regional tipping element and monitoring facilities, as well as the larger network, needs to be a different kind of recognition that incorporates a substantial environmental nonlinearity into a formerly linear or a linear imagination of a process. So that's a new challenge for these facilities, as well as being able to connect to multiple, as Marielos mentioned, multiple different constituencies from agriculture to business to households to cities and so on. One question for you is, if you had to take a bet in South Asia or in India in particular about one decision-making table that could accommodate some of the science and the representation, what would be that decision-making table? No commitments,
I'm not
just speculation.
Yeah, I'm not sure it exists right now,
Yeah.
but 10 years ago, I had written a global assessment on climate risks, and one of the things I had suggested was that at the national levels, including in my own country, we should have annual
Yeah.
climate risk assessments that are reported and debated in Parliament.
Parliaments.
Because while the IPCC reports, while the IPCC reports are certainly welcome, are needed, I think we don't have that kind of time to wait 5-7 years for each cycle of the reports to come out.
And I'm seeing Marielos with a vehement yes on this. But I think that
But if I could also say, drawing from outside of the climate space, we did innovate in our governance and our technological development mechanisms when it came to dealing with the pandemic. We suddenly then had the Environment Ministry and the Health Ministry and the Finance Ministry coming together almost on daily reporting on what was happening. We're bringing in different actors to shrink the vaccine development from 60 months to 18 months. So it's not that it is not possible. The point I'm trying to make again is that we have not established that connection between the planetary tipping point and the near-term risk in terms of lived reality. That is what the pandemic did for us.
That is the entire point
Yes.
of this exercise. So I'm going to take that Parliament, but also the tables, the recognition can be created quickly. I think that creates a great bridge to our third speaker, Ralph Rodven from the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, who just yesterday we had a conversation about, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to clap for her. I'm an extremely sort of a taskmaster here, giving people their say, but Rolf and I just had a conversation yesterday about, given how complex and sort of multidimensional the Arctic science is, thinking of toxicology, thinking of ecological change, thinking of climate change, thinking of local impacts, thinking of largers, where do you take your science to be recognized? And Rolf's answer was very entrepreneurial. And I wanted him to reflect a bit on how do you take your representation of what's happening to tables and get them to recognize you, and a little bit of your reflection on where might be a good table to recognize tipping elements, whether in the Arctic or more broadly. So over to you, Rolf. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, everyone. I guess I'll step one step back first and just tell a bit about where we're from and what we are. So the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program, this comes to you about your relevance. It was actually established due to this speech of Mikhail Gorbachev in 1997, when he talked about the need to lower the Iron Curtain and to address some of those joint challenges we had in the Arctic. Up to then, we've thought of Arctic as a white, pristine place, clean, virgin, without any environmental issues. But we started during the 1980s realizing that levels of contaminants in wildlife, including also in humans, were higher, much higher than expected. And realized because none of those sources for those contaminants are within the Arctic or within the high Arctic, it needed to come from somewhere else. So in 1991, the Arctic Monitoring Assessment Program was established as part of the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy. And we now a working group where we have a network of about 900 international scientists working for us, but also representatives, head delegates from all 8 Arctic states, and all the what we call the 6 permanent participants or indigenous peoples, as well as observers and non-observers. And and what we try to do is to monitor and assess trends in levels of contaminants as well as climate change, how it influences the ecosystems of the Arctic, including humans and human health, and to bring forward science-based, policy-relevant recommendations to the table of policymakers. So, and then I guess, why could the Arctic be important when it comes to tipping points? Well, first and foremost, there's no place where climate change is happening faster than in the Arctic right now. The average warming in the Arctic is more than 3 times as fast as the global mean. We have since 1978 lost more than half of the sea ice of the Arctic Ocean when it comes to the extent, and that equals more than the area of India. The glaciers have melted so much that it's already contributed to 4 centimeters, almost 4 centimeters of sea level rise. 13,000 gigatons of ice or water have melted from the Arctic glaciers. The Arctic oceans are acidifying 3 to 4 times, or parts of the Arctic oceans are acidifying 3 to 4 times as fast as any other ocean body in the world. And when we talk about the coral reef bleaching, think about the Arctic Ocean, which also provides food, not only for the Arctic peoples, but also for Europe. And I mean, we've been here in Brazil eating bacala, so we know that cod from Barents Sea comes here. And we may be in a situation in the future where we will have to reduce the fishing to 1/6 of today. That will impact global food security. And also wildfires. We have parts of the Arctic where wildfires have increased 4 times since 2010. And also, as we heard from the stage yesterday, as Johan Rockham said, a major part of those tipping points are actually located in the Arctic, and those are the tipping points we are most close to reach, like the overturning circulation of the Atlantic Ocean, permafrost thaw, glacier melt, wildfires, and so on. So what kind of role can institutions take in that way? Well, what we learned is, from the very beginning, is that for science to reach policymakers, it needs to be relevant. It's not about dissemination or outreach, just putting your message in a bowl and throwing it out there. You need to be targeted, which means, first and foremost, you need to understand what do the policymaker need to know. What is the relevant question on the table of the policymaker? What can science bring to the table at the moment, and what can it not bring? What are those knowledge gaps which we need to address to be able to do policy-relevant scientific recommendations? And then to move this forward as a process where you maintain the scientific integrity, but also where you provide the policy relevance. So that's how we've been working with it. And also, all of these issues are on several levels on the scale when it comes to where it's relevant. So what we've been doing is to both address the international levels as well as the national and regional levels. and they have to be addressed in different ways. So when we work together with the Stockholm or Minamata Convention on persistent organic pollutants or on mercury, we work in a different way compared to when we do recommendations to Inuits on the west coast of Greenland on how to maintain food security or food safety when you eat local food or traditional food, and when you have a higher exposure of mercury, and how to balance that with a more Western diet, which often there means burgers and fries, which have their health issues as well. So we try to address all of these bodies in different ways, and all those need adapted solutions or targeted policy recommendations to be able to work. And then in particular, when it comes to Arctic tipping points, I really enjoyed what was said by the previous speakers here, the need to address them in interdisciplinary way. It's not only about climate science, it's not only about modeling, it's about social science, it's about how to understand those adaptation needs, how to communicate those adaptation needs, and how to integrate all levels of decision making to be able to put forward the best recommendations and put forward the best advice, both within each state, but also internationally, because some of these issues are common or joint among states, and we can learn from each other in the way we address this. There are some very good examples. I guess you will come back to them later on how to do more strategic adaptive thinking for the future, and to kind of couple those bodies and bring forward a joint learning, I think could be a very promising way forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ralph. We have a few minutes. Let's see if I can get the mic. Thank you. All right, so this mic seems to be more effective. A couple of things, and I've noticed that with all the speakers, that we're a lot more comfortable talking about the knowledge of tipping points, the impacts, the changes, the things that can be represented, and that act of recognition. How does that knowledge land in the corridors of the power to respond in a way that compels, provokes, makes it inexcusable not to coordinate a response, is still an open question. And I've heard from Rolf that it's multi-scale, from Arunabha that it's political, it's parliament, but it's also broader, from Marielos that it's within regions, across regions, that it's kind of trial and error. But again, tipping elements are not the first time that groups of countries have faced existential risk to their way of living. The small island developing countries have been seeing this for years in the sense of just looking at sea level rise. And I want to do something that's a little bit unfair and pick on one of my students, Bryn Evans, who's in the audience here, who's working with the delegation from Vanuatu and spent his summer in Vanuatu working with people there on some of the implications of how you bring the science and how it is being brought into legal frameworks. And I'd love your reflections, Bryn, on the recognition of science from the perspective of countries who have seen these kinds of existential risks. What's worked, what have been triumphs, and what can the Nordic regions, what can the Amazon region learn from the experience of the small island countries? Sorry, small question.
I'm going to try and get the... Oh, thank you. Thank you to Jessica for putting me on the spot here. I'm more than happy to talk about the experience of small island states. Like Jessica mentioned, I'm representing the delegation of Vanuatu here at COP30 after I spent this past summer in Vanuatu doing a research project on local knowledge and how it was uplifted through the recent ICJ advisory opinion request. So just to give a bit of context on the background for Vanuatu and a lot of its islands around there, there's a massive, really triple threat in terms of climate effects to these small island states. For Vanuatu, it exists in a kind of Goldilocks zone latitudinal Goldilocks zone where cyclones, tropical cyclones, are extremely prevalent. It's on the Pacific Ring of Fire, so earthquakes and volcanoes are also extremely common there. So in a lot of these small island states, there's been for the last 3,000-4,000 years, there's been an ability to adapt to these really severe climate phenomena. But now, and I appreciate the comments of Arunabha on this idea of a linear development pathway, because now we're seeing in these small island states this pressure for a lot of these communities that have built these very strong community resilience frameworks for living with these strong climate effects. We're seeing this pressure to industrialize and to urbanize. And so communities are being forced, especially the youth of the communities, are being forced to leave their homelands behind, come to the cities, find money to go to school, pay school fees, and that's thrown a spanner in the works of these traditional forms of knowledge that have enabled these communities to be resilient to these climate effects. And obviously, you're also seeing more intense, sometimes more frequent, but certainly more intense tropical cyclones, drought periods. And so it's a huge question in small island developing states, how you balance this desire to industrialize and integrate into the global economy with ensuring that these traditional modes of knowledge, indigenous scientific knowledge is still uplifted. And so I think there's a huge interest from AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, in advocating, along with the Nordic Council and other countries, on this idea of monitoring tipping points and ensuring that different forms of knowledge are uplifted in the monitoring of tipping points. I hope that answered your.
Thanks, Bryn. Yeah, one of the classes I teach at Yale is on design of environmental governance. And a big piece of that is creating the spaces within political processes, within budgeting, within investment reviews, within environmental reviews, to recognize the science. We're just about at time, but I do want to end with a concrete example of recognition that Arunabha has volunteered to give, a specific example or two of the recognition of the science in a political process, because that's our biggest challenge with these facilities. I think the science is very clear, the willingness to monitor is clear, the value of that, but then how does it get recognized? So last word to you, Arunabha.
Thanks, Jessica. I think I was a little too abstract in my initial intervention, so I'll give 3 examples at a national, subnational, and city level. One is we have something called the Finance Commission. It's a constitutional body that apportions revenues between center and states. It is now seeking a revision of how climate-related risks and disasters can be incorporated into the formula to distribute resources between the center and the states based on prior vulnerability, not post hoc disaster management. Second, one of our most fossil-dependent states, called Odisha, is looking at a paradigm of green economy. So 28 new value chains to create completely new jobs and livelihoods that create about $40 billion of investment opportunity in that state to solve for that political economy. And third, at a city level in Thane in Maharashtra, this is the first city where they've started allocating budget lines to deal with heat stress.
So, Marielos, do you have any last examples of concrete recognition of science from the science panel for the Amazon? Anything come to mind? Ralph has the next panel, so he has time to offer his concrete recognition. So, for ladies first and ladies last.
I think that some concepts are really getting through the talk that you hear from at least certain politicians and decision makers. So if you think about tipping points, that's something that ministers of environment in Colombia, Brazil, are talking about, So I think we have gone through that, and that is kind of becoming the common language. The issue is how do we go further from there, and what can we do with that? A concept of flying rivers, humidity moving around. It was there in science for decades. It's not something that we discovered last year, but it's only about 2 years ago that has become really an issue that you hear it more and more because people are realizing what is the consequences of that. So it may take time, but I think we are getting through with some messages.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. I just want to reiterate the point of the tipping element monitoring facilities is not to replace, but it's to build on and weave together the experiences of how to hold the microphone, but the experiences and the successes, but to accelerate them and to sharpen accountability for not just the representation of the changes around us, the nonlinearities, but the deeper structural, institutional recognition and formalization of our response. The cards on your seats have more on the concept paper as well as a design framework for thinking about accelerating this routine. If you have comments, thoughts, anything you'd like to add, advice to give, people we should be consulting, please do get in touch. Our contact information is in the papers. I'll be around for the next week. And thank you so much for coming to a 9 o'clock event. Thank you.